A warm welcome to the programme. In just the past few minutes, the Russian Defence Ministry has said that one of its warplanes has been shot down in action over Syria. According to the statement, the plane's two pilots managed to eject, but it's not known exactly where they are. Turkish military officials say they shot down the Russian plane after it strayed into Turkish airspace close to the border. Let's get the latest from Turkey. Selin Girit, our correspondent in Istanbul. Selin, just tell us a little more about what Turkish officials, what their version of events is.
Well, Turkish presidential sources have been saying the downed jet was a Russian-made Su-24 type of a warplane. They say it was shot down by Turkey near the Syrian border because of rules of engagement. The Turkish sources are saying they have warned the plane about the rules of engagement, but the warnings were not adhered to, and that's why the plane was downed. Turkish media and the sources have been saying that two Russian pilots have ejected themselves with their parachutes, but the whereabouts of them are still not yet known. The Russian Defense Ministry has also confirmed that the downed fighter jet is Russian, but they're saying it did not violate Turkish airspace. So there is a conflicting account of events there. And we have to remember that last month, Turkey also shut down a drone this time that had also violated Turkey's airspace. That drone was Russian-made, but Russia had denied that it was theirs.
Yes, it has been a source of tension, hasn't it, that border? I'm just reading a report on the Reuters news agency. The Turkish military saying that the plane was warned 10 times in 5 minutes, is what they're saying.
That's what Turkish officials are saying, that they are saying they have warned several times the Russian jet, but the warnings were not adhered to, and that's why they decided to shut down the plane. The area, Turkish media reports, where the jet was downed is just across the border in Syria, where Turkmen people, culturally related to Turkish people who live in Syria, were fleeing to because of the Russian airstrikes and the clashes with the Assad forces. And Turkey had recently opened its borders to welcome over 1,500 Turkmens in the area. And Turkish reports suggest that the remainings of the jet actually fell down on a refugee camp where these Turkmen people were sheltered in. So things are still moving on. We are still waiting to hear more from Turkish officials and Russian officials as well to exactly what has happened, where the pilots are, whether they have rescued this, and why exactly this happened and what next might take place.
And Selin, just give us the sort of broader context to this. Of course, many people would argue that Russia is acting to support President Assad in Syria, so on a different side to Turkey when it comes to the conflict there.
Well, it seems there's kind of a proxy war going on. Russia is aligning itself with the Assad regime, and Turkey says Assad has to go. That is a prerequisite for Turkey for any kind of peace talks or for any kind of resolvement of the Syrian conflict. Turkish government says, first step, Assad needs to go. Well, international community has actually drifted away from that line, but that is a red line for Turkey still. Since Russian airstrikes have started, Turkey is increasingly cautious about what's happening across the border. And Russia is saying they are actually targeting the Islamic State militants in Syria, but that's not necessarily what Turkey thinks. Turkey says and thinks, Turkish officials think that Russian air forces are actually targeting anti-Assad opposition forces, not only the IS. So there is that kind of a proxy war going on. So this might be a very significant moment, and we need to yet learn why actually this has happened, and in fact if Russian airplane has indeed violated Turkish airspace.
Selin, many thanks for that. Selin Girit, our correspondent in Istanbul. Let's turn to Moscow now. The BBC's Sarah Rainsford is there. That was the the version from Ankara. What are officials in Moscow saying, Sarah?
Well, we did get a statement fairly quickly from the Defence Ministry here in Moscow, which confirmed that a Su-24 Russian fighter jet had been downed, had crashed, it said, in Syria. The Defence Ministry here, though, is saying, in its initial report at least, that this plane was apparently shot from the ground. So that, of course, is a direct contradiction to those reports from Turkey saying that the Russian plane was shot down by Turkish fighter jets for violating Turkish airspace. Now, what the Russian Defence Ministry is saying is that the plane was at all times during its flight within Syrian airspace, and Russia's saying it can prove that. It says that was recorded by objective means of control, the statement says, and the circumstances of the crash are being clarified. It says the plane was flying at 6,000 metres. It says that both of the pilots are believed to have ejected from the aircraft prior to it crashing, though it's not clear where those pilots have come down or indeed what their fate might be now. So a directly contradictory statement from Russia, but certainly confirming that a plane has come down. It says inside Syria, it says it never left Syrian airspace.
Sarah, this is exactly what many feared, wasn't it? Some sort of clash, and as we were hearing from Selin, this proxy war in Syria, but some sort of clash between the forces that purportedly are fighting on the same side, but clearly with slightly different interests.
It is, and obviously this is an extremely delicate situation. It's why, of course, when Russia began its airstrikes almost 2 months ago inside Syria, there was a lot of talk about the need for deconfliction. So talks between Russians and Americans in particular about their parallel program of airstrikes within Syria. There were also previous concerns, F-16 planes in Turkey scrambled on the border with Syria because there had been previous reports that Russian planes had been violating Turkish airspace. And at that time, a lot of people talking about the fear of an escalation of this conflict if a plane was indeed to be shot down for violating airspace. That's what's happened. The question is now whether calm heads can prevail. I think there will be some urgent talks between the leaders, of course, of Russia and Turkey to come, but obviously an extremely delicate, extremely difficult situation that we're now in.
And of course a much bigger picture, Turkey a member of NATO.
Absolutely, and as I say, that's why this is so difficult. Russia has been carrying out those airstrikes in Syria now for almost 2 months, and interestingly in the last week it's actually increased those strikes precisely because Russia says it's fighting against Islamic State. It says that's a threat to Russia. It increased its airstrikes, increased its military campaign within Syria after the FSB here, the security service, confirmed that that plane that was that exploded flying from Egypt to Russia almost a month ago, that plane had been brought down by a bomb presumably planted by Islamic State. So Russian military action in Syria has increased. There are now some 50, 60 sorties by Russian jets every single day within Syria. And that is, as I said before, that is in parallel with the coalition airstrikes led by the US. So it's always been recognized as a very difficult, potentially explosive situation. And the latest now is this suggested violation of Turkish airspace and this plane now having been downed.
Sarah, many thanks. The BBC Sarah Rainsford live for us in Moscow. Let's just recap what we know so far. The Russian Defence Ministry in the past sort of 10 minutes or so said that one of its warplanes has been shot down in action over Syria. According to the statement, the plane's 2 pilots managed to eject, but it's not known exactly where they are. Turkish military officials, for their part, say that they shot down that Russian plane after it strayed into Turkish airspace close to the border. So 2 conflicting versions of events of what's happened. This plane, as we can see there, dive bombing to the ground. That only happened about an hour ago, but statements coming out both from Moscow and Ankara about what happened. Let's turn to Famil Ismailov, who's with me now in the studio. This is a very significant escalation, isn't it?
It is very much, because not just because of the situation on the ground and possibility of clash between NATO allied country and Russia, but also because of the longer term consequences of this event. First of all, the economic relations between Russia and Turkey will suffer a lot if the row continues into the political and economic sphere. The Russian gas that was supposed to flow to Turkey will not flow to Turkey. The Russian tourism that is benefiting Turkish economy will not benefit Turkish economy anymore. But the biggest problem is political problem. Russia was supposed to be close to Turkey as a regional ally, but now that alliance is under threat.
What's your sense of where this might head? Will, as Sarah said, cool heads prevail in an attempt to stop this going any further?
You know, judging by the statement of Russian Minister of Defense, there are some cool heads. This hint that the most probably, according to preliminary data, the Sukhoi 24 airplane was shot from the ground, that sort of gives a possibility of for Turkish authorities or generally to create a different picture of what has happened to the plane. Not the F-16 shooting down Russian plane, but some shot from the ground, that which happens in the war zone, which brought the plane down. So that could be a possibility to de-escalate this escalating situation.
The Russians knew that this was a problem. There have been warnings in the past and some close calls in the past few months. I mean, it does seem that nothing was really done to stop this happening again. And actually, the arguments are going to continue over where exactly this plane was. But the fact was, it was very close to the border. It must have been.
Well, I mean, this is a very tight space where they're operating. It's just few kilometers north, and you're already in the Turkish airspace. For fast-flowing military jets, it's nothing. It's within few seconds you will be violating somebody else's airspace. But on the other hand, a military strategist who have been thinking the whole operation through should have recognized that. And we know that there have been agreement on de-escalation, so recognizing who is foe and friend between the American planes and the Russian planes. And it is obviously a time when the Turkish and Russian planes would have the same, probably have the same system. But at the end of the day, there's a territorial issue here. There's a border, there's an airspace which should not be violated. And Russian military aviation strategists should know when they plan their sorties how they will going to land and fly and do the bombing. At the end of the day, the question is, there's a tight space for landing into the Latakia airbase, which takes if you fly, depending on the weather. I'm going to very technical here. You have to go make a big circle as a plane and just go on for landing. But that could take you into the airspace of Turkey, and that's probably what happened this time as well. I'm very surprised that, as you said, there was 10 warnings within 5 minutes, and they were not answered. That could be the issue of de-escalating to recognizing friend against foe.
How is this likely to play in Moscow? Because there is always that question of how, we don't know what's happened to the pilots. We think they've ejected. But how's this going to be received if indeed people, I don't know what sort of version of events we'll get, because this is going to be mostly played out on TV that supports the government, right?
Well, Russians have liked this French saying, à la guerre comme à la guerre. You are at the war. This is the war situation. So these sort of things are expected to happen. Planes shot down and soldiers killed. At the end of the day, it is what the Russian authorities, the Russian leadership, how they're going to play it out. If they're going to play down the situation altogether, then we're going to see the escalation. If they're going to play it up and start making sort of flexing muscles and talking from the position of force, then that's going to be.
What's going on in
24 hours a day, Russian television will tell Russian public what Russian leadership wants them to hear. And from the statement of Minister of Defense, I would expect that at the moment, most of the electronic media will be directed to cover the story as the plane which was shot down from the ground. If the statement changes, the coverage of this event, of this incident in Russian media will be accordingly changed.
Famil, many thanks for being with us. This fast-moving situation. That was Famil Ismailov from the BBC's Russian service. Do stay with us here on BBC World News. Still to come.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.